Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
Just before we hit record, Kristen was telling me that her Instagram reels are full of people who are sick and dogs, which is probably perfect for this episode when we're talking about empathy versus compassion. Because if you're watching a lot of people on Instagram, well, maybe it's a question, who are going through a pretty tough time, how does that leave you emotionally?
You do internalize what they're going through, and I think good reels do that. You put yourself in their shoes, and it's pretty exhausting. But then on the flip side, I get doggies to make me happy.
Yeah. I mean, it is a good combo. And we did an episode a while ago on empathy and empathetic leaders. We truly believe in this. Empathy is such a critical leadership trait forever, but particularly in 2024. And I've been digging into that command and control. Funnily enough, it came out of World War II when all the people came back and they moved into leadership roles. So it was very military style, which has shaped the history of leadership in a business context. But now we've seen the rise of empathetic leadership. We think it's fabulous. However, there are some downsides to being an empathetic leader. And as we've started to bring more incredible experts into the PowerSuit membership network, we're learning a lot about some of these nuanced words.
I know.
And when we've been talking about empathy, we have found something that kind of surprised us. So we thought we'd share it today.
Well, we were challenged last week with this concept of compassion, and it is very different than empathy. And so it's taken us down a really useful research and thinking rabbit hole. And we found it worthwhile enough, the differences and the power of each, to share today.
Yeah.
Specifically focused, I'd say, more on compassion today and the value of compassion as a leader, but also the differences between the two.
Compassion versus empathy.
Well, let's start with empathy. And so, again, we've done a pod on this, and I've got brain block today, so I can...
Oh, no, you haven't done it? You don't know the number?
I can't, but I'm thinking it's
Devastating.
probably in the 40s. And we did on empathy, high-performing, empathetic kind of leadership and cultures. And so empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It is understanding how someone feels. That's an important word. And imagining how it might feel for you. So it's a way of relating that can involve the same emotion in yourself. And it actually is an automatic feeling. Our brains, when really attuned, and we can develop empathy, enable us to be more sensitive to others. And actually, some people are more empathetic than others.
I think it's episode 7, by the way, practicing empathy in the workplace.
Oh.
That makes sense.
Way back, okay.
Yeah, it might be. We might have done more on that.
Thank you.
And I love that that is an automatic reaction, that empathy is super automatic. We don't have control over it. It may be something that we grow or practice accidentally over time. Compassion is a choice you can make. And I like to think of it, I was talking about this before we had this conversation, around even in friendships, the idea that you can care and provide support and help, but maintain an arm's length emotionally, so you're not adopting those emotions. Compassion, therefore, is a lot more productive because you're effectively asking the question, what can I do to help, rather than staying stuck in the same emotions as the person you're watching or listening to, which can be a really demoralizing experience. So compassion gives you the ability to jump to action and to help someone, which triggers the classic dopamine hit, which is a really positive emotion. So you actually can be A, productive and helpful, and B, actually make yourself feel really good. Whereas empathy, if you stay in it too long, it's just draining and exhausting.
Yeah, I found this research that shows that empathy activates the brain's pain centers, which kind of makes sense. It's this really intense part of our brains. So when we empathize, we feel someone else's pain. And there's probably some biological reason that we do that. Like there probably is, right?
Oh, there is. I can tell you.
Oh, great.
It's the in and out. It's the tribalism of humans. So we empathize with the people surrounding us. So either relationally or proximity-wise, this enables us to identify with each other and build really strong social connections. The flip side is people you don't empathize with are the other. So which is why in this age of social media, that we have these really black and white discussions, because our brains can't handle this idea. Well, that's why we have to practice compassion, because empathy is you versus us, effectively.
I got it. And when it is you feel it very deeply. And yeah, that's so interesting. Whereas compassion, this research shows, is that it activates the area of the brain related to positive emotions and motivation, which can lead to healthier emotional response. So I think that's that, from what I read from this, is there's this real feeling versus action and doing, in a way.
Yeah. And one of them is a choice and the other one is an automatic response. So compassion should follow empathy. So I'll use an example from my life, and anyone, I'm going to say anyone who's been a teenage girl, but maybe that's not true, will have experienced this, that you get caught up in your friend's drama. So someone hurts your friend and you feel empathy, you feel angry or upset, you feel those, you share their emotions. With compassion, you then have the ability to go, I know that my automatic response is to feel that. I can now take a step away and go, how do I best help this? So empathy would be, I'm in it and I'm angry with them and I'm sharing all the frustrations I have too. And compassion is going, is that the best thing for them right now? Or would be the compassionate thing to do maybe to help understand how to resolve the conflict or to understand their role in the conflict or whatever else it is. So so I feel like one is sparked by the other, but it is an important difference.
Yeah, I think I did read that they lead into one another, but I've thought of two different instances this week where I felt the different things. And the first instance was empathy, and my heart hurt. It was two really random occasions. And one was, I overheard a conversation of my daughter and her friends, and they were chatting about another girl who clearly is having issues and not getting along with people. And the way they described her made my heart hurt, because I just remember that's that tribalism thing, us versus them, and I really sensed that in that conversation. And another was that I heard my son describe a teacher he's struggling with who has issues, and my heart hurt again. Maybe in the way that my son was describing it, or maybe because I actually could feel how that teacher was struggling. And I, as a human being, my heart hurt. So that was an example of a time that I really felt what it must be like to be in their shoes. And then the other time with compassion, and this is probably why I'm not a great coach, or maybe I am, like I do jump to solution mode and I can get a sense of where people are at, and rightly or wrongly, I don't wallow in it, but I'm like, right, what can we control and what are the next steps? And so I feel like I hear them and I feel sad that they're dealing with whatever, but I'm also very good at going, right, like move it to the compassion stage.
Yeah, I think that's bang on, a great example. Whereas other people might stay stuck in empathy of like that natural trigger.
And is that where they would maybe fall into allowing them to continually complain and we talked about the conflict, the drama triangle last week, and you're just allowing someone to sit in victim mode maybe, eh?
Yeah, you are. And you're also hurting yourself because you're taking on, and the example that got me really thinking, and we're putting it in the newsletter as well, but I was at a dinner party last night, fabulous, and she is hosting this gorgeous student, 20-year-old from Japan, beautiful woman, and being me, I was really curious, and I could just pick up on a vibe from her that she wasn't super happy. She was probably feeling homesick. You know, you had that immediate empathy. And then I started to chat to her, and then of course she bursts into tears. And she is absolutely homesick. She had a terrible first experience here. She's now in a much nicer home, but she's missing her family. She's never lived outside a home, total culture shock. I couldn't get it out of my head. It's that heartbroken thing again where you're like, this is so counterproductive. In the moment, I think we have a similar approach that I tried to move to compassion and was thinking about what's helpful here. Like, is there a connection I can make? And actually just having a chat with her and letting her vent and talk, all helpful. But then I came home and the empathy kicked back in and I just felt miserable on her behalf. And I was like, this is such a great example of how unhelpful empathy can be. That doesn't help anyone. Like me coming home and worrying about her all night doesn't help her, it doesn't help me, it doesn't help anything. Yeah. Whereas figuring out a couple of tangible ways that, you know, have a nice conversation or have a laugh with people, useful, very helpful, very compassionate. very mindful.
It's so interesting that there is indeed, you can be too empathetic and it can lead to burnout and exhaustion. And you experienced just a tiny bit of that last night. And one thing I also heard when you were telling that story was you sat in it and didn't know what to do because of the emotion. And I was just reading this guy, his name's psychologist, Dr. Paul Bloom, and he argues in his book against empathy, which that sounds really bold, but he was like, too much empathy can be paralyzing, leading to poor decision making because leaders are overwhelmed by emotional distress. So it's just really interesting that you just experienced the smallest version of that.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty easy to get incapacitated with empathy.
And I love the example. I'm a huge fan of Hamish and Andy. They have a great podcast and they do this thing on extreme empathy. Again, we're adding some examples in our newsletter, but it's hilarious because it's so true. It's people that my favorites that I saw were even things like, I get so sad for the trucks that have to go uphill because it's so tiring. Or if I pick a piece of clothes at the shop and then realize I don't want to put it back so it doesn't feel rejected. And it's true, right? Like extreme empaths can find empathy and attach emotions to so many things.
It must be exhausting. It also makes me feel a little bit better about wanting to move to compassion with my daughter, and she gets me in trouble all the time. We've had a few podcasts on this with are you a helper, a cheerleader, a supporter?
Oh.
What type of coach are you? No, what is it again?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. It'll come to you when I continue talking. But you know when someone comes to you in vents and they just want to
Oh, yeah.
They just want you to be like, I really empathize with you and just sit in it with them. And I'll never get at that because I'm, more compassionate. No, but I do, which isn't always the right thing. I get that. But it's so interesting that I'm going to watch this in the next week. I think I'm seeking compassion because I want someone to help me out of it, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because I saw a note from you in our podcast notes about is compassion too soft? And I think it's hilarious because compassion is actually probably one of the hardest skills to master, because if you think about the people who have to use it the most, it's people on the front line. If you're in an ambulance, if you're a cop, if you're in the military, if you're a nurse, even if you're a teacher, the sheer amount of emotional load you would have to take on to stay in empathy with all the people and all the stories you have to deal with day to day would be incredibly overwhelming. So they have to practice the really hard job of compassion, of going, how do I help? I'm going to care and I'm going to provide help, and then I'm going to emotionally move on because I can't stay in it. So I actually think it's a really tough emotion or a tough skill.
Yeah, and it almost has to go through this entire branding exercise that empathy did, though, because we saw the rise of empathy probably, it definitely was pre-COVID, but it would have taken hold during COVID, of course. And with leaders like Jacinda Ardern and so on and so forth, they really brought this concept of empathetic leadership and empathy into the workplace. And so if we were to go into a meeting room right now and say we'd love to lead with empathy, you wouldn't get weird stares anymore. You wouldn't get any judgy looks. But if we were to go in right now and say we need to lead with compassion, I suspect there would be some thinking around, oh God, here we go. And I just wonder if, and no doubt we can overcome this, but I wonder if the brand of it, to your point of first line responders, when I think of organizations that we donate to, like children's organizations and people that are genuinely front lines and have all these ads, they use compassion a lot. And in fact, they use it a lot in their companies' names, like Compassion Africa and Compassion for the Children. And so it's got this real nonprofit like brand positioning to it, which is interesting.
Yeah, like a charitable.
That's what I meant.
Yes. Well, and it actually is. Like looking at the dictionary definition, it is charitable. It's the ability to feel compassion, to feel something towards sympathy towards someone, and to offer care and support without taking it on. But I actually think the great thing about these two things is they go hand in hand. Without empathy, you can't have compassion, because if you can't put yourself in the shoes of others and understand those emotions, you probably can't be compassionate at all.
Yeah. Actually, do you know what's so interesting, though? Is all of those organizations need you to take action, which means they need you to have compassion over empathy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I was like, that's very Mad Men. I've just finished 7 seasons of Mad Men. I've rewatched the entire thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they got Mad Men involved in this because they nailed it. They actually needed us to feel compassionate which is action over
Yes.
just being like, oh, I feel so sad for all those people who are in war-torn.
Because that's too big. That's that whole, the problem is too big. What can I do?
So
That's when
clever.
you are just feeling the overwhelming
clever.
emotions.
Okay, let's talk about some benefits for using compassion in the workplace and as a leader.
I think the first one is that it's non-exclusive. It's inclusive. So whereas empathy is I identify with people like me and the person in front of me and the emotions that they're experiencing, compassion enables us to think more broadly and go, what are all the different moving parts in this situation? And how do I feel for everyone? And I think this is, again, if we're thinking about charities, this is what people talk about with really awful criminals. Feeling compassion is I don't have to identify with the person in order to want to support and help them.
And then back to this drama triangle again last week. And we didn't do a podcast episode on how to kind of get out of it. But I would see this as the antidote for someone in victim mode. Rather than empathizing and sitting in that with someone, compassion will actually get someone out of that. And of course, we haven't done a podcast on it yet. We'll probably do a mini masterclass in the membership network. But it feels as though you can actually get people out of unhelpful behaviors. And I would say another big benefit would be, because empathy can lead to burnout, you're avoiding emotional exhaustion.
Yeah, well, and that's when we're talking about, we're going to do this amazing mini masterclass on peer coaching, and that feels exactly on that. And we've got this incredible expert coming in to teach our members about the difference between sitting in empathy and diving down the hole of emotions together, and instead asking really great questions to help someone solve their problems and tackle their challenges and be a real true supporter, rather than what we think can be supportive, which is meeting someone where they are emotionally, but actually maybe just dragging each other down a bit.
That's really powerful. And that's actually, when I think of it now, my compassion is intact when I coach, but it's the great questions. So I'm looking forward to that. And actually, we've got a little bit of a takeaway at the end of this as well. But
I'm
I
going to
think
start calling you Compassionate Kristen. I feel like this is a label you're really going to take on.
I don't. Empathy is interesting because it actually does hurt. Like I know I feel it in my chest, and like you described last night, and it's not something I enjoy sitting in. And so I probably move to action mode before actually. I think there is value in actually sitting for a while.
It's that problem solution thing of sitting in the problem while it's uncomfortable.
But because it's uncomfortable, I do want to jump very quickly. Therefore, I mirror that onto other people. So rightly or wrongly, maybe
we're all learning about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. But I like this idea of sustainable caring, and I read
sustainable caring.
And I had a leader years ago, and actually you know this person as well, and he talked a lot about servant leadership. And when I think of servant leaders, I'm like, oh yeah, that's so him. Faults and all, warts and all. I'm like, that person encompassed servant leadership, and it was introduced by this guy Robert Greenleaf in the 70s, and it actually revolves around compassion. So we think of serving others in leadership is really about highlighting the importance of leaders focusing on what can I do to help this person get from A to B, or how do I clear this obstacle, or how do I coach this person from this point in their lives to this point in their careers. And that concept of servant leadership, rather than, I don't know what the opposite would be, but I like that term as a style for compassionate.
I think the opposite is that command and control style of...
What would you say would be empathetic leadership? Like that,
I think
because
this is where
serving feels more actionable.
I feel like this is where they cross over. The servant leadership, to be compassionate, you need to experience empathy.
Yeah, true.
It's just that you need to turn it into a more intentional thing rather than just that innate, immediate response. I mean, I was just thinking about this in relation to when we talk about the power of saying no, and you should have said no to something when you're frustrated about doing it. And I wonder if that's the same thing of to identify empathy versus compassion is you'll know it's empathy when you're feeling emotionally drained by a situation. And this all came about in our household anyway. We were talking last week, there's a couple of friends having a disagreement, and my girlfriend said, it's so nice to be able to talk about this and think about it but keep it at arm's length emotionally and not get caught up in it. And we didn't have a label for it then, which is why all of this has come about really interesting. But now the idea of that's compassion. You can help, you can participate, you can do what you want, but you're also just not in it.
I know, and I probably didn't have a label for this time last year when I had a family member come visit me who is in a difficult relationship, and I was owning that relationship and constantly coming up with solutions. And what I found after a time was this person never took me up on my solutions, even though they were so obvious and the right thing to do. Now they weren't ready; they needed to whatever. And I just remember in this extended visit with a family member going, kind of not my problem. Like, and that was this boundaries thing of I just can't take this on.
Yeah.
And
it's not helpful to. Yeah. Like, no one is getting any benefit from you feeling equally distraught by it.
No.
Which I think is a real light bulb for me, is that empathy as a be all and end all is really entirely unproductive, but as a trigger to spark helpful behavior, very powerful.
Yeah. So I guess we would encourage anyone who is sitting in it could be a difficult dynamic, it could be a really great relationship you have, someone who's close to you.
Scrolling Instagram.
It could be scrolling Instagram. But actually think to a relationship at work or at home or in your personal life, and are you currently being overly empathetic? And is it time to move to compassion? And we've got a tip for that.
Well, this is something, just before we deliver the tip, this is something we get a lot of from our members, actually, around people leaders. One of the greatest benefits PowerSuit delivers to people leaders is, at the moment, a lot of people leaders feel like they're the coach, they're the therapist, they're everything to help the emotional needs of their team, which is great servant leadership. But if you are stuck in empathy, you are taking on all of this stuff, whereas the likes of PowerSuit can come in and help really upskill and self-leadership of team members to take some of the burden off people leaders, but also being able to have compassionate conversations means that we're not taking on the burden so much and not getting that burnout feeling.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, do you want to deliver the tip?
Okay, well, the tip is to take a step back from the emotion and ask, how can I help? And we've said it a few times in this episode, but it's as simple as that. And actually, I'm looking forward to that peer coaching mini masterclass, because that is asking great questions. And what is a great question? And this is a good example of one, because it puts the onus and responsibility back on them to articulate what is it that they need, but also probably triggers them moving from a pain area in their brain to motivation area in their brain to do something about it. So how can I help? It's really great.
Well, and maybe the answer, if you actually ask that question out loud, the answer might be, I just want to vent. And that's fine, But you're asking the question from a hands away, hands off perspective, not in the muck with them.
True. Any other final parting thoughts, Nat, before I deliver
No, but I would
quote?
love to hear your quote, Kristen.
Actually,
Compassionate Kristen's quote corner.
Okay, I've got a good one. And too many dudes in my research this week, but it's Daniel Goleman. He's a psychologist and the author of Emotional Intelligence. And his quote is, empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. Compassion is knowing there is pain and taking action to alleviate it.
I love it. That's
good,
actually perfect. Yeah,
I know.
Good on you, Daniel Goleman.
Thank you, Dano. Appreciate that one. All right. Well, good. Take care, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that episode. I'm going to ask.
Oh, I was going to say, if you feel compassion for us, we would love a 5-star review.
Yeah,
we haven't asked for it for a while.
No, we haven't. Good.
So don't worry about our emotional well-being, but we would love you while you're there right now, while I'm talking, just hit that 5-star. Only 5-star. We don't want any other ratings. Just the 5-star, because you would be amazed over the last year and a bit how much that has helped boost our awareness and our authority in the podcast world. Yeah. And we've been stuck in the 60s for a while. I want to get up. More likes.
Have compassion.
Take action to help us.
Yes, thank you. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.